And next up, we have Arun, who's going to give us a talk. And I do love a title with an exclamation point. He is going to talk about break up the monoliths and lay them to rest. So, hi, Arun. Welcome.
Hi, Alona. Thank you. Hope you can hear me well.
We can. Can we put up your slides, please?
Yes. Okay, let me go. Thanks, Alona. Thanks for the quick introduction. Let me start by this quote, which says, difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations. It's sort of a journey that I want to share here. Primarily, this journey we took on the API side, and that's the topic that I had, is to break up monoliths. We are a fairly large organization building B2B applications. So what it really means, over a period of time, we've built monoliths, and my talk sort of covers a little bit of a theoretical topic on what monoliths are, what strategies did we use to break it, and a couple of use cases on what the journey was. Right? Quickly introducing myself, I'm Arun. I take care of the platform engineering at Amadeus. It involves me to be talking to multiple different products and systems within the system, and obviously to connect all these together to build a better product for our customers. Right? So I put a one slider on the organization just to indicate the size or scale. We provide sort of the travel backend solutions, which basically means you need stable, reliable systems, and it's been running for 30 odd years. Why the slide is because just to give you an indication, the applications built even 2-3 years back, which sort of fall into the segment of monoliths, and that's where we are going to focus on, right? So where are we from an enterprise evolution standpoint? So when most of the organizations started, early 80s, early 90s, they were building monoliths, if not on mainframes, but some of the applications started on mainframes, right? So what was the communication systems behind? Largely would rely on, let's say, a TD5, EDIFACT kind of a messaging. Overall, eventually we moved to next set of monoliths, probably early 90s, early 2000s, which was relying on service-oriented architectures, a little bit on APIs. It extended from purely EDIFACT TD5 messages to SOAP-based, REST-based messages, right? And where are we headed? Some of them, a new age organization, people who started early 2010s probably are in a microservices, a slightly larger microservices model. But what's underlying probably REST APIs, maybe in some cases you don't even have messaging, you have completely stateless services dealing with situations, right? So what is a monolith? I mean, I did give a large high-level view of different scenarios, but what's a monolith? Obviously, a monolith is an application that's built in the past. You could build it in the future as well, but the core concept is it's either attached at the database, which makes it heavy, either it's the build release process, you have too many components which need to go together. They are very tightly coupled. It's hard to break, hard to independently deploy, hard to independently build. And last but not the least, monolithic thinking. I mean, you have a culture where you release large scale applications, you wait for changes to happen together, etc. Right? So a monolith could be defined in various different aspects this way, right? But what does it mean to break it? Especially when you have a vision to use APIs. Vision, I mean, obviously a vision is never to use APIs, but the vision probably is to make it more manageable, sustainable, reliable, and obviously underlying system you would probably use microservices to enable some of those systems, right? So there are three ways. I mean, if you're looking at breaking a monolith, you're looking at three ways. A technical aspect, you're more looking at a code base. It's probably large, so you want to break that code base into multiple small code bases. You're looking at various footprints, file system strategies, database strategies, etc. When you're looking at a business view of a monolith, you're looking at, is there a business functionality that I can break free from? Is there some criticality, non-critical applications, let's say a backend system, a UI system? Can I break that out and build a new microservices model? Or an economic value? What does it take to break? If I bring a new application, what benefits do I get? Or when you're looking at it from a point of view of microservices, the manageability, the reliability on it, and all the economic benefits which underlying helps it, right? So this is at a one dimension of breaking a monolith. The other dimension, obviously, when you're looking at it from an idealistic approach, you have a large monolith. You have two ways to break it. I mean, this is the two simplest way. Create mini monoliths. You have the same underlying factor. You have the API layer, you have a storage layer, and then you have like a shared services in between. And then you create smaller instances of it, right? Yeah, it's nicer, smaller, but it's like mini APIs. Mini monoliths. But when you look at the ideal approach, obviously you're looking at microservices. You're breaking out stateless services. You have a common API layer. You have a common storage layer, but then you create multiple functions in between which help you drive your changes, right? So that's where I would say how you would break a monolith. But again, the third dimension, one, we saw the ways to break it. The second, we saw what is the high level approach. And then the third, I would say a strategy, right? And my case studies would be on two, one on the strangling side and one on the breaking side, and I will explain you how. Strangling is a simple approach where you have a large monolithic application. You slowly shrink it over a period of time by using new various strategies. You either route requests to different places, you break out components, etc. And on the breaking side, it's pretty simple. You're looking at building a parallel product, right? So you have a big monolithic application, you identify various ways to break it, create a new microservices application, and then you switch from the old to the new. So two of my case studies, one would cover each of them, but what's underlying underneath, which is where the APIs come in, is a common governance model. You use common languages, common tools, common contracts, so that each of these applications talk to other components or other applications in a seamless manner, right? So let's look at the first use case, and I've given you the end case scenario. I will take you through the journey of what we did here. It primarily is an application which does a validation box. I mean, this basically caters to about 10 million requests a month, which is quite substantial in a B2B backend system. Initially when we started, if you look at this whole picture, all of these components was one single monolithic application. But over a period of time, we broke out different components. If you see on the right, new components were built, and it was eventually integrated into the overall system. And then there was an API layer which catered to all the requests, right? So let's look at how this journey happened. So just imagine that in your current ecosystem, you have an application which is basically a monolith, and probably let's take the strangling approach on how we take that journey forward, right? So one, obviously, when you look at the monolith, it's a big application tied very well with the database behind the scenes. You first start identifying, okay, it's a lot of, okay, I have a monolith I need to break. That's like embracing that there is a scenario which I can get to a better state scenario, right? I start identifying what are hidden couplings, what is the level of interactions it has with the database, what kind of front-ending systems, who are the users who touch it. And most important, when you're breaking a monolith, it's not just the backend services or front-end services, it's about the database as well. And remember, it's a very hard journey. I started with that slide. It is a hard journey. It takes sometimes years to go through this process, but it's very important you take this journey if that's where you want to head it. And again, this is not a technology change alone. When you do this, there are organization structure, etc., which change along with this. So obviously, as I said, start with the scenes. You break out the UI component. That's what we did. And again, what I explain here is exactly what we did behind the scenes, but it's sort of a journey that you could assess and in what kind of challenges or problems you see at each of these stages, right? So primarily when I'm saying we took out the UI component, if you notice the request still go into the monolith directly, which had the UI backend, all of these kind of systems, but you created a new component, which is the UI layer, and then you start routing some of the requests through the UI layer, right? This is where we start. The presentation layer is sort of decoupled. It's a start small approach. It's not something that is big and it makes it hard, but you progress on this approach. So as you continue on this journey, think of microservices. You don't have to think of a design which is like completely the smallest possible component to break into, but you can start breaking it into microservices. If you want to get into microservices too, it's great. Then you start, this is the vision of simplifying, so make it as simple as possible, independent components. You could also start building flags. This is the typical approach of managing releases. You could have new features built, but switching on and off could be through feature flags that you manage. There are multiple tools to manage this. And when you start building APIs, which sort of starts in the next phase, think about how secure and flexible it is, right? So this is a mode where you're still designing and thinking what should be the approach. So as I said, the first approach, you had a backend, you had a monolith, now you call it a backend. You have all your requests routed through your front-ending source, which is the UI that has been built, which is probably an independent component now. And this is a phase where you can start your API fast tracking, right? So you open source this application. When I say open source, could be within your application, within your organization, external to the organization. But this is a phase which you could leverage to say, okay, now my backend is flexible to accept external requests, right? Ensure there is limited downtime so that it is well managed. So as you progress on this journey, the next phase is obviously to start building components. I did share in the model that I had, we had multiple components on the right. So we start building, let's say, a parser component. This is where you start focusing on an API design. The old components still exist. The new components have a new database along with it, and this is where the initial journey of breaking the monolith sort of starts. Again, if you notice, the new component that has been built, which is let's say the parser component, still is not getting any new requests. You're still processing most of the requests or the functionality with your UI backend components. But this is also a phase where you start syncing your parser database with the core database. Linking or decoupling is one of the core components in this phase, and it's a hidden tendency that whenever you build a new component, it's easy to switch back to the older ways of working. That's something that you need to resist. Build workarounds to ensure that you start using your APIs, and that's the layer that you've built now. Again, this is where the start of the switch happens. You have an old backend which was catering to all requests independently. You've built a new backend which routes requests to the new parser. So it doesn't have the parser component within that backend, but it's now an extended component. And you also have a one-time sync that you could probably do between the parser database, and that will come in the next phase. But this is a phase where you start routing your requests to your new component through your backend, right? This is where you start doing your canary loads, test whether the new component is working. If it's not working, switch back, ensure the new component is working well. Obviously, this is a phase where you have double the operation. You have a parser component sitting in your old backend and a new backend, but you also need to ensure that it's decoupled. So invest heavily on agile systems so that you can keep moving pretty fast, right? So obviously, this is the new world. You have also introduced an API gateway so that it's easier to manage all these requests. But this is a phase where you've sort of completely decoupled your old backend. No requests go to your backend, especially when it's hitting the parser component. Parser is just another component. Let's not get into details of what it is. But let's say there's a parser component. Your gateway automatically identifies that this request needs to be not routed to the backend core component, but to the parser component. And this is how you start scaling, right? And also notice on the right, the database of the parser database and the core database have been separated. There was a one-time, let's say, an extraction transformation, and then you manage the two components separately. And this is the phase where you have successfully implemented the first microservice or a first service which is broken out of your core component. And like the parser database, you implement hundreds of services. The example that I gave to start with has about 200 services now, and there is nothing called a central core database. Even the core component is a microservice, and it operates accordingly. So obviously that was the strangling approach, where you slowly built a microservice, built it, extend it into a way where it could operate and operate in a new fashion, strangled out the major component and sort of narrowed it down to the smaller one, right? The second, obviously, the case study is a simple approach, which is the big bang break an application approach. The current application, if you notice, is on the right. It's a set of Lego blocks. Everything is together. It sits on one large mainframe or a VM or a set of VMs, but it's one application where, as I said, it's a monolith tied at different levels. It's hard to break. But then there was a big transformation happening within the organization. Let's say this was an application which was catering to internal application deployments, right? So this is what it was doing. It was taking tar balls, it was deploying it into various applications, but then we also transformed into cloud. So which basically meant we had an opportunity of rebuilding this application from scratch. So we took the breaking approach. This system continued to run, but we built a parallel system which will cater to cloud and old ways of working. And while we were building this, we thought, what is the best ways of doing it? Built with all the microservices strategies in place, build the APIs that could be consumed by consumers, the APIs connecting to monitoring systems, etc. And this was a big transformation. So it took about 6 months to build, and 6 to 12 months to build. And there was a big cutover saying, okay, now we stop using one application and switch to a completely new application. So this is a big bang approach of using this and how you could implement it in your systems, right? Where are we today? Again, this is more to set context that it works, and it helps, and you could probably use it in your own systems. It was a 6 to 12 month journey. As I said, it's not easy. It takes long to implement. And while we do this, we moved from a 3 month release cycle to, let's say, 4 or 5 times releases a day, which is about 200 times faster. We also enabled inner sourcing on your API. So because it was not a small team which was building, we gave APIs to do multiple different actions and functions, which enabled about 1 million plus pull requests within the organization. We have not outsourced it to an external to public, but within the organization, we have 1 million plus requests so far. And obviously, this helps backward compatibility. We have an application, we have an API gateway, which helps us manage these APIs. So we almost have zero rollbacks. We continue to move forward. It's an agile system, so it helps you to deploy, keep changing things quickly. And obviously, while we do this, architecture comes first. You have to set up your architecture in such a way that it's loosely coupled. And the core concept is you have a DevOps and an API first mindset, which is very important, because API first mindset is you think of an API first before you build an application, which is very important. Otherwise, you build an application and try figuring out what are the APIs needed to keep it running, right? And again, last but not the least, trust in automation. You have to have a bite-sized approach, especially if you're using a strangling approach of breaking a monolith. You have to build smaller components which help you move to the new phase, and that's where you drive success, right? So that sort of covers the area which I wanted to share in terms of what the application does. But again, slightly tangential. We are one of the largest travel backend systems, and if you prefer to build applications on our systems, The platform is open, free to use. You could click on the link or type this link, developers.amadeus.com, and leverage all the APIs that you want. This is not the topic that I spoke on in terms of what we build, but then API first is a mindset that we have adopted. And this is also an opportunity for any of you to start consuming these APIs for yourself. So thank you. That brings me to the end. I can take some questions, and before I wind up, I would say stay safe. We are hopefully at the end of the pandemic, and stay safe, and hopefully you found this presentation useful.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting talk. And the first question I have for you is, do you find it easier to build APIs for new applications versus taking what you've called the strangling approach?
Good question, Elona. I would say yes. I mean, yes and no, depends at times. I would say it's when you're looking at breaking an application, you have to look at various components like security, what's the impact to customers, etc. But when you're using the breaking approach, you're building everything ground up. So it makes it much easier to think API first. But when you're looking at a strangling approach, obviously it makes it very complex, because you have to change a running engine when the car is on the tracks, right? So it's different approaches you need to take, but in both cases, security is something that has to be paramount.
Which do you personally prefer?
I prefer the breaking approach, Ilona. It gives you a fresh start, clean slate to start everything. Even a 2-year-old application can become a monolith, either through the ways of operation, the way customer uses it, saying, okay, I don't allow it to be changed, etc. But it's very important for us to ensure that we build what is best for the customer, right? So I always leverage on the breaking approach, where you build everything from scratch, but it's always true that you don't have the budget and the money to do it, nor the time. So it's always easier to take the strangling approach, which gives you an iterative model to try and test your strategy, whether it works or not.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Please type it in. Well, you've got 3 more minutes. Do you want to add anything?
If there are no questions, I think what I would like to say is the key thing that I started with, Elona, is the bet that this is a big journey for people who are looking at moving from one phase to, I wouldn't say microservices as an end goal. As I said, API first approach is something that you want to take. It's a journey which is going to take months to years. I've been in a transformation in the past which took about 3 years to complete, and it's never easy. So it has a lot of phases where we have to go back and forth, convince a lot of customers, convince a lot of internal stakeholders. So it's always important for us to keep that in mind while we are designing or building APIs. So always keep in mind it takes time, and keep at it.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation. And I'm going to let you go now.
All right. Thanks, Elona. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Best wishes. Bye-bye.